few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world.
And now, please welcome Ambassador Caroline Kennedy, Ed and Jack Schlossberg, and the 2022 Profile and Courage Award honorees to the stage.
Thank you all for being here tonight. It means more than ever after all that we've been through. I know all of us have lost people we love. The library has lost some special friends, but and our country and our world are facing difficult times. But I hope that reuniting with good friends and people who share a commitment to a more just and peaceful world will be a source of strength and hope in the coming months, and I hope that everyone is having a great time tonight. And that's why we're especially grateful to our honorees for coming here to share their courage and commitment with us. And on behalf of our family and the foundation, I want to thank each and every one of you for returning for this celebration of political courage and being such steadfast friends and supporters of generations of Kennedys and of the Kennedy Library. Before we present the awards, I just want to quickly thank a few people. I want to also recognize two people. We're not even going to thank them, but I want to cheer for them, which is Chuck Daly, who is here, who was the president of the library and the foundation. Served in President Kennedy's White House, and Senator Paul Kirk, who built this library and Theodore Kennedy. So thank you both for being here. I want to thank my husband Ed, who created this award, which is based on the ship's lantern from the USS Constitution and is a beacon of light to shine us through the darkness. And my son Jack, who has brought new intelligence and devotion to the Profile and Courage Award and the New Frontier Award. And we're also so happy to have Jasmine Davenport and Mayor Lumumba here, who are the winners that he selected and who have made us so proud. Longtime library supporters will also know that he continues the tradition of allowing me to introduce somebody in my family who you all already know. That's been one of my specialties for many years. I want to thank Ron Sargent, whose chairmanship has steered us through the past few years, and the director of the library, Alan Price, whose commitment to President Kennedy's ideals means so much to our family. And I want to make sure, it was said earlier, that everyone knows that since the last time we gathered for the May dinner, a really wonderful thing has happened at the foundation, which is that Rachel Day Floor, who has been here for 15 years, and I know all the directors and chairmen of the foundation would agree that most of the good things that happened here were made possible by Rachel, even though no one ever saw her do all the work. And she is an outstanding leader. And a creative strategist. She joined the foundation as a toddler, and now she is finally our executive director. And we couldn't be here without Yvonne Garcia. I know how many demands you have on your time, and we're honored that you've chosen the library. And we're always grateful to State Street, who's been on the board from the beginning and have a huge group here. I want to say another word about the importance of family. I know President Kennedy couldn't have done it without his brothers and sisters, and that's why it means so much to have my cousins here, and why we're so happy to welcome the families of our honorees tonight. When politics is tough, it can be hardest on those who are the closest. So we know that our honorees couldn't do it without you. And I'd like to ask the family members of the honorees to stand so that we can applaud for you too. I want to thank the distinguished members of our Profile and Courage Award Committee. Senator McCaskill is here tonight. Others came down with COVID, but luckily geniuses Beth Myers and David Axelrod were also able to be here. And I think the deliberations meant a great deal this year because we all understood that the stakes are higher than ever and courage is critical to our survival. And that's why we unanimously decided to give an unprecedented 5 awards to officials, both Republicans and Democrats, serving at all levels of government, local, state, national, and international. Each of them has put their career and even their lives on the line to preserve democracy. Too often we take our freedom for granted, but this year we've all realized how precious it is. President Kennedy's election remains the closest in the past 100 years, so it's appropriate that we celebrate election integrity here tonight. He gave his life for his country, as people did protecting our capital on January 6th, and as people are doing every day in Ukraine. So we are aware that as citizens, our responsibility is grave. But my father also taught us that there is nothing more important than living a life of courage and service. And our honorees tonight are living his ideals and showing us how much more each of us can do when it really matters. It's now my privilege to introduce our first honoree, Wandrea Shaye Moss, who worked full-time for the Fulton County Department of Registrations and Elections for most of her career. Like thousands of poll workers across our country, Shaye has served quietly to make the system work year in and year out. But when elections are close or people seek to undermine the result, our entire system depends on their professionalism and integrity. In 2020, she found herself on the front lines, targeted by threats of violence against herself and her family, yet she continued to do her job. The announcement of this award brought additional threats on her life. It's an example of her bravery that she's joining us tonight. Please welcome 2022 Profile and Courage honoree, Shaye Moss.
Forgive me for a little case of the nerves. Unlike my fellow honorees, I'm not used to giving speeches. I'm not used to being in the spotlight either. Okay. What I'm used to is quietly doing my job, even if that usually meant waking up way too early. Usually if that meant waking up too early and coming home way too late. I'm used to helping people in my corner of Georgia vote. And Thank you. And making sure their voices are counted and their votes are counted. And I know this is what you might call the unglamorous behind-the-scenes work, but I'm used to that. So for more than 10 years, I had a job I loved, and I was really good at my job too, but it wasn't easy. It's work that required patience, for sure. It required commitment as well, the kind of commitment that doesn't mind long days, long nights, checking, double checking, getting everything right, and you're on a tight deadline. It also required treating every voter with respect and appreciating just how important it is to make every voter feel heard and valued for our community and country. Until recently, I didn't realize it required courage too. I read a quote from John F. Kennedy that brought it home for me. He said, "What really counts is not the immediate act of courage or valor, but those who bear the struggle day in and day out. Not the sunshine patriots, but those who are willing to stand for a long period of time." So. Thank you, absolutely, amen to that. A decade of standing up. But it all changed for me overnight. Ever since December 2020, my family has been under attack. Attacked because people have spread terrible lies, lies about me and my mother, simply because we were doing our jobs, doing the work our democracy requires day in and day out. My mom and I have both heard the worst kinds of threats and harassments. Many of those were just openly racist, and they were from people who don't even know us. They don't care about our dedication, and who seem to just hate everything that we are and everything that we work for. So none of this has been easy, not even standing before you tonight. But I am so grateful for those who have been standing with me, who have been standing up against these threats. I'm grateful for my mom and my son, Inde, who are here with me tonight. My mom is one of the strongest people I know, and we wouldn't be here tonight if it weren't for her bravery and courage. I'm grateful to my legal team, including Von DuBose, who's also here tonight. Together with my team at Protect Democracy and all the other attorneys, we are using the law to even the scales against hateful and dangerous lies. I'm grateful for all the hardworking journalists who are committed to pursuing the facts. I'm so grateful for all of you, my fellow honorees. Each of you took a risk for something much greater than yourselves, for country, for democracy, for rule of law. But I want to give a special thank you to all the anonymous election workers out there, the ones that are doing the heavy lifting our democracy depends on, far from the spotlights. Tonight, I represent all of them, all of those hardworking people with incredible courage to do the job and do it right. As President Kennedy said, our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. I want to thank the John F. K. Library Foundation for all the work that they do in considering me all the way down in Georgia for this award. Thank you.
Thank you for those inspiring words. I learned two things in law school. The first was to keep it short, and the second was to always thank your mother and father for all they have done for the John F. Kennedy Library. Another thing I learned, in the United States, we don't have one election system. We have more than 50, and secretaries of state are the chief election officers in our democracy. In Michigan, Secretary Jocelyn Benson has spent her career fighting to make our elections more free and more fair. In 2020, she defended our democracy from attacks by President Trump and others who tried to overturn the results of the election in her home state. In the end, the results of that election stand as the most secure in our nation's history. For protecting our elections, I am delighted to welcome Jocelyn Benson to the stage for the 2022 John F. Kennedy Profiles in Courage Award.
Ambassador Kennedy, Jack, members of the Selection Committee, trustees of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, thank you. This is an extraordinary honor to be here with you to celebrate the work and the life of President Kennedy, whose life and legacy directly inspired my own path and hope that public service could lead to a better world. I went to college up the street at Wellesley. And it was there where I connected my love of history and policy to an interest in leadership and public service. But it was here at this library where I was inspired through learning about the ways in which President Kennedy led our country and accounts of his leadership to transform that interest into a desire to seek justice, fight for equality, and serve with courage. On one of my visits, I purchased a poster in the gift shop. In it, President Kennedy is sitting conferring with his brother Bobby, heads bowed, facing each other. I love that image because to me it captures the solemnity of service, the gravity of selfless sacrifice, the weight of courage. It's an image that captured who I hope to be, fearlessly willing to serve on the front lines, running towards the fire, seeking impact, progress, and results over all else, all the while knowing that path was the hard path, the lonely path, and the painful path. It was that desire to serve on the front lines that led me to begin my career in Montgomery, Alabama, investigating hate groups and hate crimes with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And living in Alabama, it was living in Alabama where I saw firsthand how much work we still must do to overcome the structural racism that has impeded the progress of all of us, including many in our most marginalized communities. And it was in Selma, specifically, where I was instilled with a deep sense of responsibility and inspiration to continue the work of those foot soldiers who worked and marched and bled in Selma to ensure the one person, one vote promise in our Constitution was a reality for everyone. And I say this as the daughter of special education teachers who are watching on the live stream tonight. Hi, Mom and Dad. They taught me at a young age that everyone needs to have a seat at the table. And equal access to opportunity in our country is possible if our educational system and our economy are going to function and flourish. So I believe that the best chance for equity, for everyone having equal access to opportunity in our country begins and ends with equal access to the vote. And I believe, yes. So in 2020, secretaries of state were in the spotlight. We worked to protect the will of the people against an unprecedented, nationally coordinated effort to undermine the results of a legitimate presidential election. In Michigan, we worked to ensure our voter registration system enabled everyone to vote, even if they registered and voted on Election Day. We educated all citizens about their right to vote from home and worked to ensure that every voter, no matter where they lived or who they voted for, could have the confidence and clarity they needed to exercise their right to vote in the midst of a global pandemic. Now, when the polls closed on election night in November 2020, we had administered a smooth, seamless, secure election in which more Michigan citizens had voted on both sides of the aisle than ever before in our state's history. That was a tremendous success. Yet in the days and weeks that followed, we battled an unprecedented, coordinated effort to interfere with the tabulation of valid votes, to block the certification of accurate election results, and an attempt to submit a false alternative slate of electors to the National Archives. And of course, that all escalated into the tragedy at our U.S. Capitol on January 6th. It was then that it became abundantly clear to me that we were up against not just an effort to overturn a legitimate presidential election. We were up against a battle to overturn the future of democracy itself. Now, democracy prevailed in 2020, but it will only continue to prevail if people of integrity on both sides of the aisle follow the law, uphold our constitutional protections, and ensure that every valid vote is counted, giving faith and confidence to the American people that their voice matters and that their vote will count. Many of us engaged in this work, including my fellow honorees and many others who aren't here tonight, have faced threats to our safety, to our lives, for simply doing our jobs with integrity. But we cannot and we will not allow fear or threats to deter us from protecting our elections and defending every voice and every vote. Because we know that these threats against us are also threats to democracy and to the millions of Americans who have a right to choose our leaders and hold them accountable. So as I look ahead to what we must do, it's tiring. We're all tired. I'm tired. But the work to protect and defend democracy is grueling, exhausting work, at times demoralizing and discouraging. Yet I know that there were times when President Kennedy was tired. I know there were people who stood on the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965 were tired, far more tired than this. And they yet marched forward into a sea of threats and violence. We owe it to them, to President Kennedy, and to every courageous leader and freedom fighter who's come before us and since to continue their work and continue the fight for democracy, because it is a fight where truth prevails and where silence and inaction are not an option. It is a fight that is not defined by one victory or one defeat, but is rooted in the sustained, informed engagement of Americans dedicated to lifting every voice, protecting every vote, and seeking truth, justice, and accountability. This extraordinary award energizes me to ensure, as we all must do in this moment, that every American citizen knows that in this moment, our democracy is on the line. Our fundamental rights and freedoms are on the line. Our ability to ensure that we live in a country where every voice is heard and every vote is counted is on the line. And who we are as Americans is on the line. But I know that we can emerge out of this challenging, divisive moment with a democracy that has not only prevailed, but is stronger, healthier, and more robust than ever before. That's what I fight for. That's what I have hope for. And that's what I have confidence that all of us working together can achieve. So thank you, Ambassador Kennedy, Jack Schlossberg, Mr. Schlossberg, all of you, and the J.F. Kennedy Library Foundation for this extraordinary recognition. Thank you for recognizing this diverse group of honorees, because the fight for democracy truly does require leaders at every level here and abroad to stand up to the forces of autocracy. And stand up we will, together. Thank you.
In President Kennedy's book, The Greatest Courage is required to stand up to pressure from one's own party and colleagues. A lifelong Republican, Arizona farmer and artist, Rusty Bowers served multiple terms in the Arizona House of Representatives and Senate, becoming Speaker in 2019. Bowers supported President Trump in 2020, but when it became clear that Joe Biden had won the state, he was ready to accept the result and move forward. Others were not. When Speaker Bowers refused to go along with illegal plans to install false electors, armed protesters massed outside his home with loudspeakers, blaring threats against him and his family, and intimidating his neighbors. They swamped his phone and email with tens of thousands of messages daily and mounted a recall attempt to remove him from office. This campaign of harassment continues, but so does Rusty Bowers' dedication to democracy. In January 2022, Bowers killed a bill which would have allowed election results to be overturned by the legislature, and he recently declared he's running for the Arizona Senate. For his enormous courage and steadfast integrity, we honor Arizona Speaker Rusty Bowers.
Ambassador Kennedy, Mr. Schlossberg, fellow honorees, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. In the steadfast defense of their homeland, President Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian people have set an example of courage and fearlessness in the face of evil, unequaled in today's world. To be honored in their company is deeply humbling. President Kennedy reminds us, to govern is to choose facts over falsehoods, to honor one's oath and the rule of law over the rule of convenience, to respect the people's choice at the ballot box, even or especially when the result may not be according to our own desire. These acts should not be noteworthy, nor should they be praiseworthy. These decisions are the least that the people should expect of those to whom they entrust the power to choose for them. When the last debate is finished, when the last counterpoint given, we must find some common ground on which to go forward, to preserve, nourish, and restore that implicit trust that makes our democratic republic thrive against the intemperate voice in the name of change. Paraphrasing the Savior, a nation divided against itself cannot stand. We have examples here to follow. 6 decades ago in this city, President Kennedy said that the true person of courage is one whom has the courage to stand up, yes, to one's enemies, and the courage to stand up also, when necessary, to one's associates. And that the true person of dedication is one who has an honor mortgaged to no single individual or group, and is devoted solely to serving the public good and national interest. Congresswoman Cheney is such a person. I am hopeful, because of the dedicated public servants working despite threats and intimidation, for performing their tasks faithfully. Secretary Benson and Ms. Moss are such examples, as are the election workers of Maricopa County and throughout Arizona, likewise operating the basic machinery of our democratic republic. Above all, I remain hopeful because of the quiet courage demonstrated by fellow Americans, carrying onward against crippling addiction, parenting children of special needs, facing terminal illness. During the closing months of 2020 and the beginning of 2021, through the election and its ugly aftermath, our daughter Casey was gravely ill. She had been a strong athlete in school, a volleyball and track star. She had a unique method of preparation, pursing her lips, breathing expansively and deeply, preparing herself for the challenge ahead. In an end-of-life visit, after 34 days of being prohibited from seeing her, her son Lorenzo, our good family friend Dax Jones, Donetta and I were allowed a 1-hour visit. Lorenzo and Dax went first. Then Donetta and I again watched her set her lips in that determined but achingly familiar way, preparing to meet her final test. They holding and each whispering, "I love you with all my heart." These are my profiles in courage. My friends, may God grant us courage and strength in the challenges ahead. May we, one and all, determine to meet these trials with Casey's grit and grace and faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Bowers. In Profiles in Courage, my grandfather focused on the challenging task of taking on your own party. Sometimes it has to be done. Congresswoman Cheney found herself there in 2020. Make no mistake, she is a lifelong, committed, conservative Republican. In 2019, she became the highest-ranking ever woman Republican in the House. But when former President Trump and others attacked our democracy, Congresswoman Cheney put country before party and her own political interest. Her independent stand cost her her leadership position, key supporters, and she has faced countless threats and public attacks. But she has not wavered under pressure, serving now on the January 6th Select Committee and running for re-election back home. A profile in courage who does not quit, it is my honor to welcome Congresswoman Liz Cheney to the stage for the 2002 John F. Kennedy Profiles in Courage Award.
Thank you very much, Jack, and thank you to the Kennedy family. Thank you to the board of the library. Thank you to the nominating committee and the award committee for this profile in courage. I just want to say a moment first about Rusty Bowers and his family and his story, and the grace and the compassion and the courage that they have shown is unmatched. And the lesson that he gave us tonight and that he has given us throughout is one that as Americans we all benefit and are blessed by. So thank you very much. I am so honored to be here tonight, and honored because of a story in particular that most people don't know, and that is that on September 25th, 1963, President John F. Kennedy came to Laramie, Wyoming, and he was speaking to thousands of students at Laramie that day in the field house. And in that speech, which you can hear online and you can hear in the archives of the Kennedy Library, he told the students, quote, "I hope that all of you who are students here will recognize the great opportunity that lies before you in this decade and in the decades to come to be of service to our country." And he went on to explain that the ancient Greeks defined happiness as the full use of your power along lines of excellence. And he told the students who were there that day that there's no more excellent pursuit than service to our country. One of the students who was there, who was sitting high up in the rafters in the packed field house, was my dad, 22-year-old Dick Cheney. Years later, he told me that he remembered rushing out the back of the field house to watch President Kennedy's motorcade pull away. He told me how moving and inspirational it was for him to see President Kennedy and to hear his call to service. A few months ago, I had the opportunity, I was talking with Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, and I told him this story. And Steny looked at me and he said, "Liz, the same thing happened to me when I was a young student at the University of Maryland." And if you think about the millions of young people President Kennedy inspired across our nation and across party lines to service, people from Dick Cheney to Steny Hoyer, and I am tempted to stop here to say, the moral of this story is if you don't like Dick Cheney's policies, you should blame John Kennedy. But in all honesty, just think about that expanse, millions of young people that President Kennedy inspired, and think about his love of history. He was a student of American history, especially. He talked about in his speeches the great immigration of Puritans who first came to the United States, before it was the United States, trying to escape religious persecution in England. And among those were my family. The very first Cheneys who came here are actually buried not many miles from here at Elliott Burying Ground in Roxbury. They came before 1640, and they came to establish a community that could be a city on a hill, a model for the world. Several generations later, in 1829, my great-great-grandfather was born in New Hampshire. Samuel Fletcher Cheney headed west. He settled in Ohio, and he enlisted there in the Union Army. He fought in all 4 years of the Civil War. He was on Sherman's March to the Sea, and he was in the grand review of troops that marched up Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C., that marched past a reviewing stand where President Johnson and General Grant were seated. Samuel Fletcher Cheney and all those who have fought for so many generations have known the price of freedom, and they knew that they had to defend it. I think it is perhaps the greatest blessing of our nation that citizens in every generation have answered the call to defend our freedom. I have found myself, especially since January 6th, thinking often of my great-great-grandfather and of the Union he fought to defend. And this was never more true than on the night of January 6th. That night, the House returned to the chamber around 9 o'clock. Furniture that had been used as a barricade was still stacked against the walls. The glass in the chamber doors was shattered. Containers that had held gas masks were strewn around. A short time before Congress went back into session, I left the House floor that night and I walked to Statuary Hall. Statuary Hall, as you know, is where the House of Representatives met from 1807 to 1857. In that historic space, there are brass markers on the floor that mark where the desk of Abraham Lincoln sat, where the desk of John Quincy Adams sat. And there are statues of great Americans that line the walls. That night, law enforcement officers in black tactical gear were sitting on the floor, leaning up against the statues, exhausted from the brutal hand-to-hand combat in which they had been engaged for hours. Water bottles with water that they'd been drinking and using to wash away the chemical spray deployed by the rioters littered the floor. These men and women had spent hours battling a violent mob, a mob of our fellow countrymen, attempting to stop the transition of presidential power. For profiles in courage, we need look no farther than those men and women. It is no exaggeration to say that their courage likely saved our lives and our democracy. I tried to thank them, but my words that night seemed inadequate. As I walked out of Statuary Hall, I looked above the door. Standing above the door to Statuary Hall is the oldest statue in our Capitol. It is a statue of Cleo, the muse of history. Cleo rides in the chariot of time, and she has a book in her hand in which she takes notes, reminding all of us that our deeds are inscribed in the pages of history. I walked from Statuary Hall into the Capitol Rotunda, the most sacred space in our republic. This is the space where presidents, including President Lincoln, President Kennedy, have lain in state. This is a space that is watched over by statues of Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln and Grant and Eisenhower and Ford and Reagan. That night, almost every wall, against almost every wall encircling that room were SWAT teams, more men and women in riot gear, helmets, carrying long arms, some resting from battle, others standing watch, ATF, FBI, federal agents deployed inside the United States Capitol building. There in the rotunda, these brave men and women were resting beneath 8 paintings that depict the earliest scenes of our republic. These include 4 by George Trumbull, scenes from the American Revolution. One of these was painted in 1824, and it depicts George Washington resigning his commission. At this moment in 1783, depicted in the painting, Washington voluntarily relinquished power. He handed control of the Continental Army back to Congress. George Trumbull, the painter, called this one of the highest moral lessons ever given to the world. With this noble act, George Washington set the indispensable example of the peaceful transfer of power in our country. This is what President Reagan called, quote, nothing short of a miracle. This is what President Kennedy, in his inaugural address, called a celebration of freedom. And this sacred obligation to defend the peaceful transfer of power has been honored by every American president, except one. Standing on the east front of the United States Capitol on a snowy morning in 1961, President Kennedy said, "In the long history of freedom, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. Today, that role is ours, as we face a threat we have never faced before, a former president attempting to unravel our constitutional republic. At this moment, we must all summon the courage to stand against that." The question for every one of us is, in this time of testing, will we do our duty? Will we defend our Constitution? Will we stand for truth? Will we put duty to our oath above partisan politics? Or will we look away from danger, ignore the threat, embrace the lies, and enable the liar? As we leave here tonight, I ask all of you to remember this sacred duty that is passed to us. To remember that in our republic, some things have to matter. The defense of our republic, the defense of the constitutional foundations of our nation have to matter. In a republic, there are no bystanders, there are no spectators. As citizens, every one of us has a duty to set aside partisan battles and stand together to perpetuate and preserve our great republic. Ladies and gentlemen, we are engaged in a battle we must win. And with courage and clarity and grit, it is a battle we will win. Thank you all. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. That was, I think, thank you all for this truly inspiring evening that I know I only wish President Kennedy could be here to see and hear. It's now my great honor to present our final award of the evening. In a few exceptional cases when their political courage has inspired the world, we've given the Profile and Courage Award to an international elected official. And tonight is one of those times. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy of Ukraine is doing the impossible every day. His courageous defense of democracy is reminding us all of what is most precious and most fundamental to our way of life. His bravery is exceeded only by that of the people of Ukraine, and they are unifying the world, including Americans, to fight for freedom and the rule of law. We are honored to have representatives here tonight from Ukrainian religious, cultural, educational, relief, and press organizations, including the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Ukrainian Catholic Church, Ukrainian Jewish Cultural Center, Ukrainian Forward Relief Organization, Harvard Center for Ukrainian Studies, Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, Ukraine Weekly, and Svoboda. I would like to recognize all of you on behalf of all those that you represent. It is now my very special privilege to present the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy of Ukraine to the United States. Yaroslav Rysyuk is a critical player for his country. The number 2 person, he just told me there are only 40 people in the Ukraine Embassy here, and they are managing their entire effort here in the United States. So we are very, very grateful to him for coming. He has been working 24 hours a day in Washington, and it is a great tribute to President Kennedy that he and Ambassador Markarova have been immensely supportive of this award. He has taken all my phone calls, no matter what else was happening over the last few months. And this is the first time any member of the embassy has been allowed to leave Washington, D.C. since the war began. So we are truly, truly honored to welcome you, Yaroslav, and your wife here tonight, and so honored to present this award and for you to receive it on behalf of your president.
Thank you very much. It is my great honor and privilege to be here tonight and to receive the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award on behalf of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and all Ukrainian people who are fighting for their freedom. On February 24th, Russia launched an unprovoked aggression against Ukraine, invading our homeland, attacking our peaceful cities with bombs and cruise missiles, waging a full-scale war in the middle of Europe. Ukrainians made their choice to be free, to be a democracy, to determine their own future as part of the Western transatlantic community of nations. That turned out to be a threat to our aggressive authoritarian neighbor next door. Vladimir Putin decided that Ukraine as a nation does not have a right to exist. that Russia, a nuclear power, can redraw borders by force, can wipe another country off the map, and that the most fundamental norms of international law simply don't matter. His plan was to take over Ukraine in just 3 days, to topple the government, to eliminate Ukraine as a sovereign state. To fulfill his plan, he sent what he called the second most powerful army in the world. It turned out that that army was only second most powerful in Ukraine. Under the leadership of President Zelenskyy, people took up arms and stood up in defense of their homeland. We've been holding our ground for 88 days. Over these 88 days, the world has seen the atrocities, the death and devastation unseen since World War II, with thousands of people, tens of thousands of people killed, with hundreds of thousands of houses destroyed, with cities burned to the ground, schools, hospitals, kindergartens. The whole world has seen the atrocities in Bucha, in Irpin, and in other places. But our spirit cannot be broken, and we are determined to fight until we liberate our land. President Zelenskyy's personal leadership and courage have been instrumental in our fight. His bravery and strength became an inspiration not just for all Ukrainians, but for people all over the world. In the beginning of the war, many well-wishers advised him to flee, to save his life, to leave the country, offering him help to leave. To them was his famous response: "I don't need a free ride, I need more ammunition." President Zelenskyy and his team refused to leave Kyiv. Despite the grave danger to his life, he continued to lead his army and his country in this fight as commander-in-chief. Nothing can be more encouraging for Ukrainians than such resolve, courage, and determination in this fight. And this fight continues. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the United States government, the administration, Congress, and all American people for the tremendous support and for the assistance that has been provided to our country. Thank you. What is happening in Ukraine is not just about Ukraine. It's about the values that we all share, such as freedom and democracy, that we all stand up for, the values for which Ukrainians are fighting today on the battlefields. Today, as in President Kennedy's time, Russia is again blackmailing the world with nuclear apocalypse. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy's personal leadership and courage determined victory of good versus evil. Today, President Zelenskyy's personal leadership and courage have been critical on our road to victory, and we have no doubt that together we will win. Thank you for all your support, and thank you, the John F. Kennedy Foundation, for giving President Zelenskyy this award.
Thank you all. If everyone could remain seated, we're going to take a group photo, if we could. I'm grateful to all of you for joining us here tonight. Congratulations again to this year's honorees. We look forward to welcoming you and Conan back to the Kennedy Library for next year's May dinner. Good night, everybody.
Everyone is voting for Jack, 'cause he's got what all the rest lack. Everyone wants to back Jack. Jack is on the right track, 'cause he's got high hopes. He's got high